Lauren, we need to discuss some concerns about your conduct. Derek Caldwell's voice cut through the glass-walled conference room like ice. I sat across from him, flanked by Karen from HR and Tessa Mills, the new hire I'd spent 3 months training. My stomach tightened as I noticed Tessa's perfectly painted lips curve into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'd worked at Brightwave Marketing for 11 years. 11 years of late nights, successful campaigns, and client relationships I'd built from nothing. At 37, I was the senior account director, respected by my team and trusted by our biggest clients. Derek had been my supervisor for 2 years, and until recently, our working relationship had been professional, if distant. Concerns? I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. What kind of concerns? Karen adjusted her glasses and glanced at a folder in front of her. We've received complaints about you creating a hostile work environment, undermining team morale, inappropriate comments toward junior staff. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not true. Who made these complaints? Derek leaned back in his chair, his expression practiced sympathy. That's confidential, Lauren. But the pattern is concerning. We've decided to restructure your role. Effective immediately, you'll be transitioning to a support position, reporting to Tessa. She'll be taking over the Westfield account. The Westfield account. The campaign I'd spent 9 months building. The client who specifically requested me by name. I looked at Tessa, who was studying her manicured nails with studied indifference. Then I looked back at Derek, and something in his eyes, a flicker of satisfaction, maybe guilt, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about performance. This was personal. And as my gaze drifted upward, I noticed something I'd forgotten existed, a small red light blinking in the corner of the ceiling. The security camera. The walk back to my desk felt endless. Every eye in the open office seemed to follow me, colleagues quickly looking away when I met their gaze. My hands shook as I pulled a cardboard box from the supply closet. 11 years, and it came down to this. Packing my awards, my photos, my life into a box while everyone pretended not to watch. I'm sorry, Lauren. It was Brittany from Creative, her voice barely above a whisper. This is so wrong. I managed a tight smile. Thanks. Everyone knows, she continued, even quieter, about Derek and Tessa. Everyone knows she's sleeping with him. My jaw clenched, but I didn't respond. What could I say? That I'd suspected but never had proof? That I'd watched Derek's favoritism toward Tessa grow more obvious over the past 3 months. The private meetings, the lingering glances, the way he laughed at her jokes that weren't funny? Across the office, I saw Tessa already moving her things into my office. My office. The one with the window view I'd earned after 7 years. She caught me looking and smiled, not apologetic, not embarrassed. Triumphant. I turned back to my box, blinking back tears. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Lauren. Marcus from IT appeared beside my desk, his voice low. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of person most people overlooked. You might want to check the conference recordings. They're archived in the system. Incident date and time stamped. I looked up sharply, but he was already walking away, hands in his pockets, face carefully neutral. My heart started pounding. The camera. The recordings. Did he just tell me what I thought he told me? I glanced back at Derek's office, where he stood with Tessa, both of them laughing about something. The rage that had been simmering beneath my shock suddenly crystallized into something else. Determination. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that meeting. The accusations. Derek's rehearsed sympathy. Tessa's smirk. The camera light blinking silently above us all, recording everything. My laptop sat on my nightstand, the resignation letter I'd drafted still open on the screen. 2 paragraphs of professional courtesy, thanking the company for the opportunity, citing personal reasons for my departure. Clean, dignified, final. But something stopped me from sending it. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the 11 years I'd invested. Or maybe it was the memory of Brittany's whispered words. Everyone knows she's sleeping with him. If everyone knew, why had nothing been done? How many other women had Derek pushed aside to make room for his favorites? How many careers had he destroyed while HR looked the other way? I opened a new email window, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Marcus had given me a hint, maybe more than a hint. He'd risked his job to tell me about those recordings. The least I could do was follow up. The message I typed was brief and casual. Hey Marcus, thanks for the advice earlier. Would love to grab coffee tomorrow and talk more about those system archives you mentioned. Let me know when you're free. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I closed my laptop, pulled the covers up to my chin, and finally, hours later, fell into a restless sleep. Tomorrow, I would start asking questions. Tomorrow, I would start building my case. But tonight, I just needed to survive the humiliation long enough to see morning. Marcus chose a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, a quiet place where we wouldn't run into coworkers. He arrived exactly on time, carrying his ever-present laptop bag and looking uncomfortable in the way introverts do when forced into social situations. Thanks for meeting me, I said as we settled into a corner booth. He nodded, adding sugar to his black coffee with methodical precision. I shouldn't be here. If Derek found out I talked to you. He won't, I promised. What you said yesterday about the conference recordings, what did you mean? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee in slow circles. Finally, he spoke without looking at me. Derek requested certain footage to be archived last month. That it be moved not deleted, archived, which is unusual because normally we only archive footage for legal. Can you show me? I can't show you company property without authorization. That would be grounds for termination. He finally met my eyes. But I can tell you that the incident archive date he requested coincides with September 14th. The same day as that team off-site trip to the vineyard. The one you weren't invited to. September 14th. The weekend Derek had taken Tessa and 2 junior account managers to Napa Valley, supposedly for team building. I'd been told there wasn't budget to include the senior staff. But the photos Tessa posted on social media told a different story. Expensive restaurants, luxury accommodations, wine tastings that cost hundreds of dollars per person. What exactly is on that footage? I asked. Marcus shook his head. I don't know. I didn't watch it. But the file is large, almost 3 hours. And Derek was very specific about wanting it preserved but inaccessible. He slid a napkin across the table. On it, he'd written a date, a timestamp, and what looked like a file reference number. That's all I can give you. What you do with it is up to you. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing. Why are you helping me? Because I've seen this happen before, Marcus said quietly. 3 years ago, Derek did the same thing to another senior account director, Vanessa Hamilton. One day, she was running the biggest campaigns in the company. The next, she was demoted and transferred to a satellite office in Idaho. 2 months later, she quit. No one ever questioned it. No one ever stood up to him. He stood, gathering his laptop bag. Be careful, Lauren. Derek's good at covering his tracks. But sometimes, even he makes mistakes. The next week, I forced myself to watch. Not just Derek and Tessa, but everything, the patterns, the behavior, the little moments that most people missed. I arrived early and stayed late, documenting everything in a private notebook I kept locked in my car. Derek and Tessa had adjoining parking spots now, I noticed. They arrived within minutes of each other most mornings, sometimes in the same car. They disappeared for client meetings that never appeared on the shared calendar. During team calls, they exchanged inside jokes that made the rest of us feel like outsiders in our own department. The humiliation of my demotion had hardened into something colder, sharper. I wasn't angry anymore. I was observant. And what I observed made my skin crawl. In meetings, Derek's hand would rest on the back of Tessa's chair. He laughed at everything she said, even when it made no sense. He praised her work effusively while barely acknowledging contributions from anyone else. And Tessa, she leaned into it. The hair flips, the low-cut blouses, the way she'd touch his arm when making a point. It was textbook workplace misconduct. But it was also maddeningly subtle, just ambiguous enough that calling it out would make me look jealous or petty. Then came the email. A client I'd worked with for 5 years, Harold Bennett from Westfield Corporation, accidentally copied me on a message meant only for Derek. The subject line read, Campaign revisions. Derek, Tessa sent over the revised campaign deck. I appreciate her enthusiasm, but these are largely the same concepts Lauren pitched to me in August. I'm confused about why we're getting the same presentation from different people. Could you clarify the team structure? I specifically requested Lauren remain on this account. My hands trembled as I read it. Tessa had taken my work, my ideas, my research, my campaign strategy, and presented it as her own. And Derek had let her. I forwarded the email to my personal account, added it to my growing file, and smiled grimly. They were making this too easy. I started keeping a detailed spreadsheet. Dates, times, observations, evidence. Every inappropriate comment Derek made in meetings. Every time Tessa took credit for someone else's work. Every unexplained absence. Every discrepancy in expense reports. Every instance of favoritism so obvious it bordered on parody. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with this information. Part of me still wanted to walk away, to find another job and leave Brightwave in my rearview mirror. But another part, the part that had spent 11 years building a career, mentoring junior staff, and fighting for respect in a male-dominated industry, refused to let Derek and Tessa win. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. FYI, HR is already looking into favoritism. Someone else complained. Might be worth holding your fire for now. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Someone else had complained? Who? And more importantly, what had they seen? I texted back. Do you know who filed the complaint? 3 disappeared, appeared again. Finally, anonymous whistleblower portal. But timing suggests it's related to recent personnel changes. I.e. you. So someone had noticed. Someone else had seen through Derek's act and decided to do something about it. I wasn't alone in this. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. If HR was already investigating, I needed to be careful. One wrong move could compromise the entire case. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment. The camera footage Marcus had hinted at was still out there, archived but accessible. The question was, when was the right time to reveal it? Too soon, and Derek might destroy evidence. Too late, and HR might close their investigation without uncovering the full truth. I needed to be patient, strategic. And most of all, I needed to let Derek and Tessa keep digging their own graves while I documented every shovel full of dirt. The client dinner was Tessa's idea, a relationship-building opportunity with several key accounts. Derek approved the expensive restaurant and the private dining room without question. I was invited only because Harold Bennett from Westfield had specifically requested my presence. Tessa arrived in a dress that was more appropriate for a nightclub than a business dinner. Derek's eyes lingered on her as she walked in, and I saw several clients exchange uncomfortable glances. But Tessa seemed oblivious, or maybe she just didn't care. She dominated the conversation, talking loudly about Derek's incredible mentorship and hinting at future leadership opportunities at the firm. Derek's really invested in developing emerging talent, she said, her hand resting briefly on his arm. He sees potential in people and knows how to cultivate it. I sipped my wine and watched Harold's expression shift from polite interest to visible discomfort. Next to him, Angela Proctor from Summit Industries looked downright alarmed. Neither of them was stupid. They could see what was happening. After dinner, as we waited for cars, Harold pulled me aside. Lauren, can I be frank with you? Of course. Something's off with your boss, he said quietly. The way he interacts with that young woman, it's unprofessional. And frankly, it's making me reconsider our partnership with Brightwave. I've worked with you for 5 years, and I trust your judgment. But I don't trust him. I chose my words carefully. You're not the first person to express concerns. Harold nodded slowly. If you ever need a reference, or if you're looking to make a move, call me. Companies like ours need people with integrity. It's in short supply these days. I appreciate that, I said, genuinely touched. As I drove home that night, I pulled over and sent Harold a brief email. Thank you for your candor this evening. Your perspective is valuable and noted. Professional, neutral, but enough to keep that door open. Then I added a new entry to my documentation file. Client concerns about unprofessional conduct. Multiple witnesses. Date and time stamped. The evidence was mounting. Derek called me into his office the following Monday with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lauren, I need you to take lead on the Horizon Tech campaign. Launch deadline is 3 weeks from today. I blinked. 3 weeks? That's impossible. A campaign that size normally takes 8 weeks minimum. I have confidence in your abilities, he said smoothly. Consider it an opportunity to prove yourself in your new role. Translation. He was setting me up to fail. The Horizon Tech account was notorious for being demanding and indecisive. Their last 2 campaigns had been disasters, and they'd burned through 3 account managers in 2 years. Derek was handing me a poison chalice and pretending it was a gift. I'll need a team, I said carefully, and access to the creative resources that are currently assigned to other projects. Tessa will be available to provide high-level guidance, Derek said, which was code for Tessa would swoop in to take credit if I somehow succeeded. That's not what I asked for. His smile cooled. That's what you're getting. Unless you're saying you can't handle the assignment. It was a trap. If I refused, I'd prove his narrative that I was difficult and uncommitted. If I accepted and failed, he'd have justification to push me out entirely. But if I succeeded, well, Derek clearly didn't think that was possible. I'll handle it, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Back at my desk, I made a list of people I trusted. Marcus in IT, Brittany from Creative, Alex from Analytics. 3 people who had worked with me for years and who I knew resented Derek's management style. I sent them each a carefully worded message. Working on urgent Horizon Tech campaign. Need A-team support. After hours, if necessary. Interested. All 3 responded within minutes. Yes. Absolutely. I'm in. Derek wanted me to fail. But he'd forgotten that I didn't build my reputation on his approval. I built it on results. And I wasn't done yet. We worked after hours for 2 weeks straight. Marcus set us up in a small conference room on the 3rd floor, away from Derek's sightlines. Brittany designed concepts that were bold and innovative. Alex crunched data and built projections that proved our strategy would work. And I pulled it all together, crafting a campaign that was better than anything Derek or Tessa could have imagined. The night before the Horizon Tech presentation, I backed up everything to 3 separate drives. I'd learned from watching Derek. Always protect your work because someone will try to steal it. The presentation went flawlessly. The Horizon Tech executives loved the campaign, specifically praising the fresh creative direction and data-driven approach. They signed off on the concept immediately and authorized the full budget. It was a massive win, the kind of success that would normally mean bonuses and promotions. Derek's face was tight with what looked like disappointment. Tessa, sitting beside him in the meeting, kept glancing at her phone, clearly uncomfortable with not being the center of attention. Great work, team, Derek said after the clients left, his voice flat. Lauren, make sure Tessa gets looped in on all the execution details. She'll be taking point on implementation. Of course she would. I'd done the impossible, and now Tessa would get to take credit for bringing it across the finish line. But I'd been prepared for this. Every file, every concept, every piece of data was timestamped with creation dates and author metadata. Marcus had made sure of it. If Tessa tried to claim she'd led this campaign, the digital paper trail would prove otherwise. That night, Marcus sent me a text. Check your secure email. Present from IT. I opened the encrypted message and found a link to a cloud folder. Inside was a single video file, labeled with a date and timestamp, September 14th, Conference Room C. The archived footage. Below it, Marcus had written, backup exists. Your call on what to do with it. But you should know, HR subpoenaed our server logs yesterday. They're looking at everything. I stared at the file, my finger hovering over the play button. Did I really want to know what was on there? Once I watched it, there would be no unknowing. No going back. I took a deep breath and clicked play. The video quality was grainy but clear enough. Conference Room C, the afternoon of September 14th. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m., after most staff had left for the day, but before Derek and Tessa's team off-site trip officially began. Derek entered first, closing the door behind him. Tessa followed moments later, and what happened next made my stomach turn. They weren't just flirting. Derek pulled her close, kissing her in a way that left no doubt about their relationship. They broke apart, laughing, and then I heard Derek's voice clearly through the recording. After this weekend, we'll have everything in place. Lauren's been here too long anyway. She's expensive, and honestly, she's never really been a team player. We need fresh energy in that role. Tessa's response was muffled, but her body language said enough. She was leaning into him, touching his chest, completely comfortable with what they were discussing. Then Derek said the words that made everything crystal clear. Don't worry. The complaints I submitted to HR will justify the demotion. By the time she figures out what's happening, it'll be too late. She'll quit on her own, and you'll step right into that position. Acting director by Christmas. They'd planned it. All of it. The fake complaints. The demotion. My replacement. It wasn't about performance or team dynamics. It was about Derek wanting to promote his girlfriend, and I was in the way. I watched the rest of the footage with a strange sense of calm. There were more moments of inappropriate behavior. Derek joking about needing to make space for rising stars. Tessa laughing about how easy it would be to take over my accounts. By the end of the 3-hour recording, I had everything I needed. Marcus was standing beside me, his face carefully neutral. What are you going to do? I need to think, I said quietly. If this goes public, it won't just take down Derek. It'll impact the whole department. Maybe the whole company. Is that your problem to solve? Marcus asked. Or is it Derek's? I looked at him, and something in his expression, steady, determined, almost protective, reminded me why I'd stayed at Brightwave for 11 years. There were good people here. People who deserved better than Derek's corruption. I'm going to do this the right way, I said. Through proper channels. Let me think about the timing. But before I could close my laptop, my phone buzzed with an email notification. HR. The subject line read, Exit interview scheduled, Lauren Pierce. My blood ran cold. They were trying to push me out before the investigation could go anywhere. Derek was accelerating his plan. I stared at the email for a long moment, my mind racing. An exit interview meant they expected me to quit or be ready to accept termination. It meant Derek was moving faster than I'd anticipated. I had maybe a week before this became permanent. The temptation to leak the footage was overwhelming. Send it to the entire office. Post it on social media. Make sure everyone knew exactly what Derek and Tessa had done. But something stopped me. Revenge felt good in theory, but in practice, it was messy and destructive. I didn't want to be the person who burned down the company out of spite. I wanted justice. And justice required following procedure, no matter how frustrating that was. I opened a new email to Marcus. Can you confirm whether HR has accessed the server logs you mentioned? And whether they've seen the archived footage? His response came quickly. They've requested access, but IT hasn't provided it yet. Requires VP authorization and Derek stalling. But they're persistent. My guess is they'll get a court order if he keeps blocking them. So HR was trying to investigate, but Derek was using his position to obstruct. That meant I had leverage. If I submitted the footage myself through proper channels, it would force their hand. They couldn't ignore evidence that was formally submitted by an employee. I spent the next hour drafting a careful, professional complaint. No emotional language. No accusations beyond what could be proven. Just facts, timeline, and attached evidence. I included the video file, the email where Harold expressed concerns, documentation of Tessa taking credit for my work, and a detailed log of Derek's favoritism over the past 3 months. At the bottom, I added, I am submitting this through the anonymous whistleblower portal as outlined in the Employee Handbook, Section 4.7. I request confidentiality and protection from retaliation per company policy. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I did this, there was no taking it back. The investigation would intensify. People would be questioned. Derek and Tessa's careers would implode. And I'd have to live with being the person who made it happen. But I thought about Vanessa Hamilton, the woman who'd been pushed out 3 years ago. I thought about all the junior employees who watched Derek's behavior and learned that this was how you got ahead. And I thought about my own 11 years of hard work, reduced to nothing because I wasn't willing to sleep with my boss. I hit send. Then I closed my laptop, backed up everything one more time, and went home to wait. Tessa delivered the exit interview news in person, which felt like a deliberate insult. She appeared at my desk the next morning with a printed memo and that same satisfied smile. "Lauren, Derek wanted me to make sure you got this," she said, setting the paper down. "Your exit interview is scheduled for Friday. HR will go over your severance package and transition plan." I looked up at her calmly. "I haven't resigned." "Well, no, but given your performance issues and the restructuring, it seems like the logical next step. Derek thought it would be easier for everyone if we handled this professionally." The gaslighting was almost impressive. She was standing in my workspace, delivering my termination, and framing it as a favor. "I'll need to review this with HR directly," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But thank you for delivering the message." Tessa's smile faltered slightly. She'd expected tears, anger, maybe begging. My calm seemed to unsettle her. "Derek's trying to help you, you know. He could have made this much harder." "I'm sure he could have," I replied, turning back to my computer. The dismissal was clear. After a moment, Tessa walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I waited until she was out of sight. Then I pulled up my personal email and began uploading everything. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence I'd compiled. I created 3 separate backup drives and stored them in different locations, one at home, one in a safety deposit box, one with my lawyer. If Derek wanted to play hardball, I was ready. But I was also giving the system one more chance to work the way it was supposed to. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a professional voice said, "Miss Pierce, this is Valerie Coe from Brightwave Corporate Compliance. We've received some materials through our whistleblower portal that require follow-up. Would you be available for a confidential interview tomorrow morning?" My heart raced. "Yes." "What time?" 8 a.m., conference room A. "Please don't discuss this conversation with anyone in your department." After we hung up, I sat very still, processing what this meant. Corporate compliance. Not local HR, corporate. That meant my complaint had bypassed Derek entirely and gone straight to the top. They were taking this seriously. I texted Marcus. Corporate compliance called. "Interview tomorrow." His response was immediate. "Good. They don't mess around. Whatever you submitted must have been damning." It was. And by Friday, everyone would know exactly what Derek and Tessa had done. The whistleblower portal submission was surprisingly simple. A secure form, a file upload interface, and a promise of confidentiality. I attached everything: the video footage, the timeline, the documented instances of favoritism, the client complaints, the evidence of Tessa stealing credit. Then I wrote a brief summary explaining how Derek had manufactured complaints against me to justify my demotion and make room for his girlfriend. The email confirmation appeared immediately. "Your submission has been received and assigned case number WB 2024-0847. A compliance investigator will review your materials within 48 hours. You are protected from retaliation under Company Policy Section 4.7. Do not discuss this submission with anyone." 2 days. In 2 days, corporate would know everything. And once that happened, Derek wouldn't be able to stop the avalanche. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Not because I was happy, I wasn't. What I felt was closer to grim satisfaction. I'd done everything right. I'd followed the rules, documented everything, and given the company a chance to fix itself. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. The next morning, I arrived at work to find the office buzzing. People were whispering in clusters, glancing toward Derek's office. As I passed the break room, I overheard 2 junior analysts talking. Compliance interviews across the whole department. Heard they're looking into expense reports. Someone said Derek's in serious trouble. So word was spreading. Compliance had started their investigation, and apparently, they weren't being subtle about it. I kept my expression neutral as I walked to my desk, but inside, I felt a flicker of hope. Marcus appeared beside me, pretending to check his phone. They've scheduled emergency interviews. Derek's freaking out. Tessa called in sick. When are the interviews? Starting this afternoon. They've got a team of 3 investigators from corporate. They're pulling people one by one. I looked across the office toward Derek's door. Through the glass wall, I could see him on the phone, his face red, gesturing angrily. He looked like a man watching his empire crumble. Good. Let him panic. Let him feel what it's like when the system turns against you. Let him understand that actions have consequences. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. They've got the footage. Cross-checking audio next. This is going to be bad for him. I deleted the message and went back to work, pretending nothing had changed. By Thursday, the office atmosphere had shifted from whispers to open speculation. HR representatives were everywhere, sitting in on meetings, reviewing files, interviewing employees. The confidence Derek had radiated just days ago had evaporated, replaced by visible tension. I was at my desk when he appeared, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Lauren, we need to talk. About what? Don't play games with me. I know you leaked something to compliance. What did you tell them? I looked at him calmly. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you should ask HR. This is serious, he hissed, leaning closer. If you've been spreading lies about me, about Tessa, there will be consequences. Is that a threat? I kept my voice level, aware that several people were watching. It's a warning. You're playing with fire. Then I guess I should talk to HR about that too. I stood up, gathering my bag. Excuse me, Derek. I have a meeting. As I walked away, I heard him mutter something under his breath, but I didn't look back. Let him threaten me. Let him try to intimidate me. It was all just more evidence. I made it halfway to the elevator when my phone rang. The caller ID showed, Brightwave HR, main line. Miss Pierce, this is Karen Thompson. We need you in conference room C immediately. I'll be right there. When I arrived, Karen was waiting with 2 people I didn't recognize, both wearing corporate badges. The woman introduced herself as Valerie Coe from Corporate Compliance. The man was Cameron Price, an attorney from the legal department. Please sit down, Valerie said. Her expression was professional but not unkind. We've reviewed the material submitted through our whistleblower portal. We need to ask you some questions. I sat, folding my hands in my lap. Of course. For the next 90 minutes, they walked me through everything. The timeline of my demotion, the complaints Derek claimed to have received, my interactions with Tessa, the client feedback, the campaign I'd just completed. They took notes, asked clarifying questions, and showed me partial footage from the security recording, enough to confirm that what I'd submitted was authentic. Miss Pierce, Valerie said finally, thank you for your cooperation and professionalism. What you've provided is extremely valuable. We'll be conducting additional interviews over the next few days. In the meantime, I need to advise you not to discuss this investigation with anyone, including Derek Caldwell or Tessa Mills. If either of them approaches you, please contact me immediately. She handed me her business card. We take these matters very seriously. You did the right thing by coming forward. As I left the conference room, I spotted Derek down the hallway, being escorted by Cameron Price toward the executive offices. His face was pale, his movements stiff. For the first time since this began, I felt a twinge of something that might have been pity. But then I remembered his voice on that recording. Lauren's been here too long anyway. She's expensive, and she's never really been a team player. The pity disappeared. Whatever happened to him now, he'd brought on himself. Friday morning, Derek's office was dark. His nameplate was still on the door, but his desk was empty, his computer turned off. The office grapevine worked faster than any official communication. By 9 a.m., everyone knew Derek had been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Tessa's desk was also empty. She hadn't come in since Tuesday, and rumor had it she'd called HR claiming emotional distress. No one believed it. We all knew she was hiding, waiting to see if this storm would pass. I sat at my desk, trying to focus on work, but it was impossible. Every few minutes, someone would walk by, glancing at me with a mixture of curiosity and something like respect. They knew I was connected to this somehow, even if they didn't know the details. Marcus stopped by my desk with 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. Thanks. I took the cup gratefully. What are people saying? That Derek falsified performance complaints. That he was embezzling company funds. That he and Tessa were caught on camera doing inappropriate things. Marcus lowered his voice. The IT department had to turn over all the archived footage. Every single file Derek tried to hide. Corporate's forensic accountants are going through expense reports too. Apparently, there are some interesting charges for client entertainment that never involved actual clients. I closed my eyes briefly. It was worse than I'd thought. Derek hadn't just been playing favorites. He'd been stealing. How much trouble is he in? Career-ending trouble, Marcus said quietly. And possibly legal trouble. Depends what they find. My phone buzzed. A text from Valerie Coe. Please join us in the executive conference room at 2 p.m. The CEO will be present. The CEO. Diane Morrison herself. I'd only met her twice in 11 years, both times at company-wide events. She ran Brightwave from the San Francisco headquarters and rarely visited our Boston office. If Diane was flying in, this was bigger than a simple HR matter. This was a full-scale corporate crisis. At 1:55 p.m., I took the elevator to the executive floor, my heart pounding. The receptionist directed me to conference room A, the large one used for board meetings. Inside, I found Valerie, Cameron, Karen from HR, and Diane Morrison herself. Diane stood when I entered, extending her hand. She was in her early 50s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything at once. Miss Pierce, thank you for coming. Please sit. I sat, folding my hands to stop them from shaking. I'll be direct, Diane said. What we've uncovered in the past 72 hours is deeply disturbing. Derek Caldwell abused his position, fabricated complaints against you to justify an unjustified demotion, and engaged in a personal relationship with a subordinate that created conflicts of interest throughout the department. He also misused company funds and obstructed our investigation. She paused, letting that sink in. None of this would have come to light without your courage in coming forward. On behalf of Brightwave, I want to apologize for what you experienced. You deserved better from this company. Thank you, I managed. We'll be making some significant changes, Diane continued. Derek's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. Tessa Mill's employment is also being terminated for her role in this situation. We'll be conducting a full review of departmental practices and implementing new oversight procedures. She leaned forward slightly. More importantly, we need to talk about your role going forward. I blinked, not sure I'd heard correctly. My role? Diane smiled slightly. Lauren, in the middle of being unjustly demoted and facing a hostile work environment, you still managed to deliver exceptional results on the Horizon Tech campaign. Your clients have nothing but praise for you. Your team respects you. And your professionalism throughout this entire ordeal has been exemplary. She slid a folder across the table. We're restructuring the client relations department. We need someone with integrity and proven leadership to oversee that transition. Someone who understands our clients, our culture, and how to rebuild trust. We'd like to offer you the position of Acting Director of Client Strategy, reporting directly to me. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The title, the salary, it was more than I'd made even before the demotion. It was the position Derek had held, but expanded and elevated. This is temporary for now, Diane continued, but if the next 6 months go well, we'll make it permanent. You'll have full authority to restructure the team, implement new policies, and rebuild the department the way you think it should be run. I looked up at her, emotions swirling. Relief. Vindication. Exhaustion. Hope. I accept, I said quietly. Diane nodded, satisfaction crossing her face.
Good.
We'll make the announcement Monday morning. In the meantime, take the rest of today and the weekend to process everything. You've earned it. As I stood to leave, she added, "And Lauren, thank you for not just walking away, for fighting to make this right." I managed to smile. Someone had to. Walking out of that conference room, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because Derek was gone, though that helped, but because the system had actually worked. I'd followed the rules, documented everything, and trusted the process. And for once, justice had prevailed. The weekend passed in a blur. I slept for 12 hours straight on Friday night, woke up Saturday feeling like a different person, and spent the rest of the weekend reading through the materials Diane had given me. Organizational charts, budget reports, client portfolios, all the pieces I'd need to rebuild the department. Monday morning, the office was buzzing before I even arrived. The announcement had gone out at 8 a.m. Derek Caldwell's termination, Tessa Mills' departure, and my promotion to acting director. By the time I walked through the door, people were already congratulating me. "You deserve this," Brittany said, hugging me quickly. "Everyone knows you should have been promoted years ago." Alex from Analytics gave me a fist bump. About time this place rewarded actual competence. Even people I barely knew stopped me in the hallways to say they were glad to see things changing. The relief was palpable. Derek had created a culture of fear and favoritism, and people were genuinely happy to see it end. My new office was on the executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the harbor. Derek's old office had been stripped clean, all his personal items removed, as if he'd never existed. It felt like a fresh start. I spent the morning in meetings with HR, legal, and finance, going over transition plans. Cameron Price walked me through the findings of their investigation. Derek had misappropriated over $50,000 in company funds, falsified multiple performance reviews, and obstructed the investigation by attempting to delete files. Tessa had knowingly participated in the scheme and had plagiarized work from multiple employees, not just me. "Will there be legal consequences?" I asked. Cameron nodded grimly. "Derek's being investigated for fraud. Tessa will likely face civil penalties. But that's out of our hands now. The authorities are handling it." That afternoon, I held my first team meeting as acting director. 23 employees crowded into the conference room, some curious, some hopeful, all watching me carefully. "I know these past few weeks have been difficult," I began. "Trust has been broken, morale has suffered, and a lot of good people have been hurt by what happened. I can't fix that overnight. But I can promise you this. Moving forward, this department will operate with integrity, transparency, and respect. Promotions will be based on merit. Credit will go to those who earn it. And if you have concerns, I want to hear them before they become crises." I paused, looking around the room. We have a lot of work to do. We have clients to reassure, campaigns to complete, and a culture to rebuild. But I believe in this team. I believe in what we can accomplish together. So, let's get to work. The applause was genuine and sustained. As the meeting broke up, several employees stayed behind to thank me personally. Marcus gave me a subtle nod from the back of the room. Brittany was wiping away tears. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The investigation's findings kept coming. Over the next 2 weeks, corporate compliance released detailed reports that painted an even uglier picture of Derek's tenure. He'd systematically marginalized female employees who didn't respond to his advances. He'd created a boys' club mentality that excluded anyone who challenged his authority. And he'd used company resources to fund his personal lifestyle, from luxury hotel stays to expensive gifts for Tessa. The security footage I'd submitted became the cornerstone of the case. Not just the September 14th recording, but hours of additional footage that IT had preserved. Derek flirting with multiple junior employees. Derek and Tessa making inappropriate jokes during client calls. Derek explicitly stating his plan to push me out and replace me with Tessa. Cameron called me one afternoon with an update. The board reviewed everything. They're implementing mandatory ethics training, establishing an independent review committee for all personnel decisions, and creating a direct reporting line to corporate compliance that bypasses department heads. They're calling it the Pierce Protocol. I felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. They're naming it after me? Your case exposed systemic failures and oversight. You've changed how this company handles these situations. That's not a small thing, Lauren. Maybe not. But it hadn't been my goal. I just wanted fairness. Justice. A chance to do my job without being sabotaged by my boss's ego and personal agenda. Still, if something good could come from this nightmare, I'd take it. The real surprise came later that week when Diane called me into her office during one of her extended stays in Boston. I've been reviewing your work over the past few years, she said, pulling up files on her computer. Your client retention rate is exceptional. 97%. The industry average is 72%. Your campaigns consistently outperform projections. And your team loyalty scores are the highest in the company. She turned the screen toward me. These are the metrics of someone who should have been in leadership years ago. Derek held you back because you threatened him. You were too competent, too respected. He couldn't control you, so he tried to eliminate you. I just did my job, I said quietly. You did more than that. You set a standard. And now you're going to help me raise everyone else to that level. Diane smiled. The acting position ends in 4 months. But I'm recommending to the board that we make you the permanent director of client strategy immediately, with a seat on the executive leadership team. I stared at her. The executive team? You've earned it. And frankly, we need people like you making decisions at the highest level. People who understand that leadership isn't about power, it's about integrity. As I left her office that day, I thought about where I'd been just 6 weeks ago. Humiliated in a conference room, demoted in front of witnesses, dismissed by a man who thought I was disposable. Now I was being offered a seat at the table he'd occupied. Karma, I thought, had a sense of irony. The official announcement came during the quarterly all-hands meeting, broadcast to every Brightwave office worldwide. Diane stood at the podium in our Boston headquarters, her voice clear and authoritative as she addressed the company. Leadership requires more than talent or ambition, she said. It requires character. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Lauren Pierce has been appointed as our new Director of Client Strategy and will join our executive leadership team, effective immediately. The Boston office erupted in applause. I sat in the front row, trying not to cry, as my colleagues stood to cheer. Even people who'd barely spoken to me during my demotion were clapping enthusiastically. Success, apparently, made people forget their silence during injustice. But I didn't care about them. I cared about the people who'd stood by me, Marcus, Brittany, Alex, the handful of colleagues who'd risked their own positions to help me document the truth. They were the ones who mattered. After the meeting, there was a reception in the main conference room. Clients had been invited, and many of them made a point of congratulating me personally. Harold Bennett from Westfield pulled me aside with a broad smile. I knew you'd land on your feet, he said. Talent like yours doesn't stay buried for long. Thank you, Harold. And thank you for speaking up when it mattered. I should have done more, he said, his expression turning serious. I saw red flags with Derek months ago. I should have said something sooner. You said something when it counted. That's what matters. As the reception wound down, I found myself standing near the window, looking out at the harbor. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It felt symbolic somehow, the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. Congratulations. The voice came from behind me. I turned to find Tessa standing in the doorway, wearing a professional blazer and looking exhausted. My first instinct was to walk away. But something in her expression stopped me. She looked broken, genuinely remorseful. What are you doing here? I asked carefully. I came to clear out my desk. Security's waiting downstairs. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For all of it. I knew what Derek was doing was wrong, and I went along with it anyway. I convinced myself I deserved your position, that you were holding me back. But the truth is, I was just too weak to stand up to him. I studied her face, looking for manipulation, for the familiar smirk. I didn't find it. She looked like someone who'd learned an expensive lesson. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to hear it. And because I need to say it." Tessa looked down at her hands. "Derek told me you were going to be fired either way. He said the company was downsizing, and I was just stepping into a position that would have been eliminated. I believed him, because I wanted to. That doesn't excuse what you did." "No, it doesn't." She met my eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what he was. What I became by being with him." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." Tessa left without another word, her heels echoing down the empty hallway. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of closure. She'd made her choices, just like Derek had. And now she was living with the consequences. The transition to permanent leadership took another month, filled with meetings, restructuring plans, and long conversations with Diane about the future of the department. We implemented new policies, transparent promotion criteria, mandatory documentation for all performance reviews, and an anonymous feedback system where employees could report concerns directly to corporate compliance. I also made a point of recognizing the people who'd been overlooked under Derek's leadership. Marcus got a promotion to senior IT manager with a significant raise. Brittany became creative director. Alex was put in charge of analytics for the entire Boston office. "You're building a real team," Diane observed during one of our weekly check-ins. "Not just people who report to you, but people who trust you." "That's the only kind of team worth having," I replied. The Horizon Tech campaign I'd led during my demotion went on to win an industry award. When I accepted the trophy at the ceremony, I made sure to thank my team by name, giving credit where it was due. The applause felt earned, not stolen. Derek's fate became public when the local business journal ran a story about his termination and the investigation. The article was clinical in its details. Former Brightwave VP terminated for ethics violations, financial misconduct, and workplace harassment. His name was now permanently associated with corporate malfeasance. Tessa disappeared from the industry entirely. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to another city, taking a job outside of marketing. I hoped she'd learn something from the experience, though I suspected she'd just become more careful about which powerful men she attached herself to. As for me, I threw myself into the work I'd always loved, building campaigns, nurturing client relationships, and mentoring the next generation of account directors. The fear that had permeated the department under Derek's leadership gradually dissolved, replaced by something healthier: mutual respect, collaboration, actual meritocracy. 6 months into my new role, the company held a leadership summit in San Francisco. Department heads from every office gathered to discuss strategy and culture. During a breakout session on ethical leadership, Diane asked me to share my story. I stood in front of 200 executives and told them what had happened. Not for sympathy or attention, but to illustrate a point. Toxic leadership doesn't just harm individuals, it damages entire organizations. And the only way to prevent it is through transparency, accountability, and giving employees safe channels to report misconduct. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, people started raising their hands with questions. "How did you stay so calm during the investigation? What advice would you give to someone facing a similar situation? How do we prevent this from happening in our offices?" I answered each question honestly, sharing what I'd learned about patience, documentation, and trusting the process even when it feels hopeless. By the end of the session, several people approached me privately to share their own stories of workplace injustice. Some had fought back, like I did. Others had walked away. All of them carried scars. "Thank you for speaking up," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "I left my last company because of someone like Derek. I blamed myself for not being strong enough to fight. But hearing your story, maybe I was stronger than I thought." "You were," I told her. "Survival takes strength too." A year after my demotion, I sat in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant buzzed me. "Lauren, there's someone here to see you. He says it's personal." "Who is it?" "Derek Caldwell." My blood ran cold. "Tell security." "He's with security," she interrupted. "They're escorting him. He's just here to collect something from HR." But he's asking if you have 5 minutes. Every instinct screamed to say no. I'd moved on, built something better, and I had no interest in rehashing the past with the man who'd tried to destroy my career. But curiosity won out. Tell security to stay with him. He can have 3 minutes. Derek entered looking nothing like the confident executive I remembered. His suit was cheaper, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined with stress. He held a small box, probably the last of his personal items from storage. Lauren. His voice was quiet, stripped of its former authority. Thank you for seeing me. I didn't offer him a seat. What do you want, Derek? I wanted to apologize. Not because I think it'll fix anything, but because you deserve to hear it. He set the box down, rubbing his face. I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my marriage. Tessa cut contact the day I was terminated. I spent 6 months fighting the fraud charges before I finally pleaded guilty to misuse of corporate funds. I've got 3 years probation and a criminal record. I'll never work in this industry again. I kept my expression neutral. And you're telling me this because? Because I want you to understand that I know I was wrong. About everything. You were talented, loyal, and competent, and I destroyed your career because I felt threatened by that. Because I was selfish and weak and willing to hurt good people to protect my ego. He met my eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right. About all of it. I studied him for a long moment, this man who'd caused me so much pain. Part of me wanted to gloat, to remind him of every cruel thing he'd said, every humiliation he'd put me through. But looking at him now, broken, ashamed, facing consequences that would follow him for the rest of his life, I felt nothing but tired. I accept your apology, I said finally. Not because you've earned forgiveness, but because I'm done carrying anger about this. Derek nodded, picking up his box. For what it's worth, you're doing an incredible job. I heard about the awards, the client growth, the culture changes. You're everything a leader should be. No, Derek, I corrected quietly. I'm what a leader has always been. You just didn't recognize it. He flinched at that, and I saw the truth sink in. He'd had someone valuable, loyal, and competent right in front of him, and he'd thrown it away for a pretty face and an ego boost. Now he'd spend the rest of his career, whatever was left of it, regretting that choice. Goodbye, Derek, I said, my tone making it clear this conversation was over. Goodbye, Lauren. He turned and left, security escort following him. I watched him go, then turned back to my desk and the quarterly reports waiting for my review. I had work to do. Real work. The kind that built careers instead of destroying them. The legal closure came swiftly after Derek's apology. Corporate legal called to inform me that all criminal and civil proceedings had concluded. Derek had pleaded guilty to fraud and been sentenced to 3 years probation plus restitution of the misappropriated funds. Tessa had settled a civil lawsuit from the company for participating in the scheme. Both had signed agreements never to seek employment at Brightwave or its subsidiaries again. It's over, Cameron told me during our final meeting. You can move forward without looking over your shoulder. Thank you for taking this seriously, I said. Not every company would have. Not every employee would have handled it the way you did, Cameron replied. You gave us a roadmap for how to investigate and resolve these situations properly. The Pierce Protocol is already being adopted by other companies in our industry. You've changed the standard. That evening, Diane took me and several other executives to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. It was ostensibly to celebrate the quarter's financial results, but the subtext was clear. This was recognition of how far the department had come in just 1 year. Over dessert, Diane raised her glass. To Lauren Pierce, who reminded us all that integrity isn't just a buzzword, it's the foundation of everything we do. Everyone at the table raised their glasses, but Diane wasn't finished. Lauren, when you were going through the investigation, you could have taken the settlement offer Derek's lawyer proposed. You could have signed the non-disclosure agreement, taken the money, and walked away quietly. Can you tell everyone why you didn't? I thought about that moment, sitting in my apartment, staring at the settlement offer that would have given me 6 months' salary in exchange for my silence. It would have been easy, comfortable, and completely wrong. Because silence protects the wrong people, I said finally. If I'd taken that money and signed that NDA, Derek would have done this to someone else. Tessa would have learned that manipulation works. And every junior employee watching would have learned that fighting back isn't worth it. I met Diane's eyes. I didn't go through this just for me. I did it for everyone who comes after me. The table was quiet for a moment, then Brittany started clapping. Within seconds, everyone joined in. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, validation that I'd made the right choice, even when it had been terrifying. As we left the restaurant, Marcus pulled me aside. You know HR asked me to help train their new compliance team, right? They want to make sure IT systems can't be used to hide misconduct anymore. That's fantastic, I said, genuinely pleased. They're calling it the Pierce Protocol Digital Audit System. Your name is going to be in the employee handbook. He smiled slightly. How does it feel to be a legend? Exhausting, I admitted, but I was smiling too. But worth it. The company's quarterly meeting 6 months later was my official introduction as a permanent member of the executive leadership team. Diane opened the meeting by reviewing our financial performance, record client retention, revenue growth of 23%, employee satisfaction scores at an all-time high. Then she turned to the cultural transformation in the client relations department. Charts showed the changes. Increased diversity in promotions, transparent evaluation criteria, a 96% approval rating for leadership in recent employee surveys. The numbers told the story better than words ever could. Last year, Diane said, her voice carrying across the auditorium, we almost lost one of our most valuable employees because we failed to protect her from misconduct and favoritism. Today, I'm proud to announce that Lauren Pierce has been appointed as Director of Client Strategy and Business Development for all North American operations. The applause was thunderous. I stood from my seat in the front row and walked to the stage, my heart pounding with a mixture of pride and humility. This was bigger than I'd ever imagined, not just running the Boston office, but overseeing strategy for the entire region. As I took the microphone, I looked out at hundreds of faces.
Some I knew well.
Others I'd never met. All of them looking to me for leadership.
Thank you, I began.
A year ago, I was sitting in a conference room being told I'd been demoted, that my work wasn't valuable, that I was being replaced by someone with fresh energy. I paused, letting that sink in. Today, I'm standing here because I refuse to accept that narrative. I documented everything. I followed procedure. And I trusted that the truth would matter. I looked directly at the employees in the audience, especially the younger ones who were just starting their careers. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Your work matters. Your integrity matters. And when you're being treated unfairly, speaking up isn't just your right, it's your responsibility. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The applause that followed felt different, not just congratulatory, but affirming. These people understood what this promotion represented, proof that the system could work, that justice could prevail, that doing the right thing could lead to success instead of punishment. After the meeting, I spent 2 hours shaking hands and accepting congratulations. Harold Bennett from Westfield cornered me with a huge smile. I knew you'd make it to the top. Your integrity was always your greatest asset. Thank you for believing in me, Harold, and for speaking up when it mattered. As the crowd thinned, I found myself alone in the auditorium for a moment. I walked to the window and looked out at the Boston skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The humiliation, the fear, the night spent documenting evidence and wondering if it would matter. All of it had led to this moment. And while I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, I also wouldn't trade the lessons it taught me. I'd learned that patience was more powerful than rage. That documentation was more valuable than confrontation. And that sometimes the best revenge was simply living well and leading with integrity. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the announcement. Proud of you. Beer later to celebrate. I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. First round's on me. As I left the auditorium and headed back to my office, The large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that used to be Derek's domain. I felt a profound sense of peace. I'd fought for this, earned it, and I was going to use this position to make sure no one else had to go through what I had. The encounter happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months into my expanded role. I was walking through the parking garage after a long meeting when I spotted a familiar figure loading boxes into an old sedan.
Derek.
He looked even more worn than he had during his apology visit. His clothes were rumpled, his face haggard. When he saw me, he froze, then seemed to deflate. Lauren. His voice was barely above a whisper. I debated getting in my car and driving away. Our last conversation had been closure enough, but something made me stop. Maybe curiosity, maybe pity, maybe just the need to see with my own eyes where he'd ended up.
Derek.
What are you doing here? Clearing out the last storage unit. Corporate let me keep some files in case of legal follow-up, but that's done now. They want everything gone. He gestured to the boxes. 22 years in this industry, and it all fits in 6 boxes. I didn't respond, just watched as he loaded another box into his trunk. I heard about your promotion, he continued, not looking at me. Regional director. That's impressive. You've rebuilt the entire department in less than 2 years. I didn't rebuild it. I built something better. He nodded slowly. I was talking to a friend who still works here. He said you implemented new harassment protocols, transparent promotion criteria, mandatory bias training for all managers. He said people actually want to work here again. Derek finally looked at me. You fixed everything I broke. I fixed the system that allowed you to break it. I corrected. You were a symptom, Derek. The real problem was a culture that enabled your behavior. He closed his trunk, leaning against the car like he couldn't hold himself up. I know you won't believe this, but I'm glad you won. Not because I wanted to lose, but because someone needed to prove that fighting back works. That the good guys can win. I studied his face, looking for manipulation or self-pity. I found only exhaustion and regret. I'm sorry, he said again. For all of it. I know I said it before, but I need you to understand. I destroyed my own life because I couldn't stand to see a woman be better than me. That's pathetic. And I have to live with that forever. Yes, I said quietly. You do. Derek straightened, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. I've been trying to get freelance consulting work. Small businesses, startups, nothing major. But every interview, they Google me. And every time, the first result is the article about my termination. He handed me the paper. I'm not asking you to lie or cover for me. But if anyone ever asks, and they won't, because you don't owe me anything, I just want you to know I'm trying to do better. I unfolded the paper. It was a certificate from an ethics training program, showing Derek had completed a year-long course on workplace conduct and professional responsibility. I can't give you a reference, I said, handing it back. And I can't erase what you did. I know. But I can tell you this. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. And it takes even more courage to try to become better. I met his eyes. I hope you succeed, Derek. Not for my sake, but for whoever you work with next. He looked like he might cry. Instead, he just nodded and held out his hand. Thank you, Lauren. For everything you didn't have to do. I shook his hand briefly, then turned toward my car. As I reached for the door handle, Derek called out one last time. Lauren. I looked back. For what it's worth, you were always the better leader. I just couldn't admit it. I gave him a small nod, then got in my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I watched him standing alone in the parking garage, surrounded by boxes containing the remnants of his career. I felt no triumph, no vindication. Just a quiet certainty that justice, when done properly, didn't require cruelty. It just required truth. The last words I'd ever speak to Derek Caldwell echoed in my mind, the same words I'd thought but never said during that terrible meeting in the conference room. It's not personal, Derek. It's policy. 2 years after the investigation that changed everything, I stood in the same glass-walled conference room where I'd been demoted. But this time, I wasn't on the receiving end of corporate humiliation. I was leading a presentation to the executive board about our department's transformation. The numbers spoke for themselves. Client retention at 98%, revenue up 37%, employee satisfaction in the 95th percentile. We'd become the model that other departments studied, the example of what leadership built on integrity could achieve. But the real success wasn't in the metrics. It was in the culture. Junior employees no longer feared speaking up. Women no longer wondered if they'd have to choose between their careers and their dignity. And the glass ceiling that had once seemed impenetrable was now just another challenge to overcome through hard work and merit. As I finished the presentation, Diane stood and addressed the board. 2 years ago, this department was in crisis. Today, it's our greatest success story. And it's because we had the courage to listen when Lauren Pierce came forward, and the wisdom to put her in charge of rebuilding what had been broken. The board members nodded, taking notes, asking questions about how we could replicate this transformation in other offices. I answered each question honestly, emphasizing that culture change required sustained commitment, not just policy documents. After the meeting, I walked back to my office, stopping at the conference room door. The security camera was still there, its red light blinking steadily. I smiled at it, a silent acknowledgement of the role it had played in my vindication. Marcus was waiting by my desk with 2 cups of coffee. Heard the presentation went well. It did. They want to expand the Pierce protocol to all international offices. He grinned. You're going to be famous. Or as famous as you can be in corporate compliance circles. I'd rather be effective than famous. We sat in my office, drinking coffee and watching the harbor through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the city bustled with life. People pursuing careers, fighting their own battles, hoping that hard work and integrity would be enough. You ever regret it? Marcus asked. Going through all that instead of just quitting? I thought about the question seriously. The investigation had been exhausting. The waiting had been torture. And there had been moments when I'd wondered if standing up for myself was worth the stress and uncertainty. No, I said finally. Because if I'd quit, Derek would have won. Tessa would have gotten my job. And the next person he targeted wouldn't have had any evidence that the system could work.
So you did it for them?
The next person. I did it for everyone, including myself. I looked at Marcus. You helped make this possible, you know. If you hadn't told me about the cameras, hadn't preserved that footage, none of this would have happened. He shrugged, uncomfortable with praise as always. I just did what was right. So did I. That's the point. As Marcus left, I turned back to my computer and pulled up the employee handbook section on ethical conduct, the Pierce Protocol, named after the case that had changed Brightwave's culture. Reading through the procedures, the protections, the accountability measures, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was my legacy. Not just a successful career, but a system that would protect others from the Derek Caldwells of the world. A framework that said employees mattered, that truth mattered, that justice was possible even when power tried to corrupt it. My phone buzzed with a notification. A LinkedIn message from a young woman I'd mentored briefly. Just wanted to thank you again for your advice last year. I faced a similar situation with my manager, and I followed your example, documented everything, went through proper channels. HR investigated, and I was vindicated. You taught me that fighting back the right way is possible. Thank you for showing us how. I read the message twice, feeling tears prick my eyes. This was why it had all been worth it. Not for my own vindication, but for hers. And for every other person who would face workplace injustice and remember that speaking up was possible. I typed back, I'm so proud of you. Keep fighting the good fight. Then I closed my laptop, gathered my bag, and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to prove that integrity and competence could triumph over corruption and favoritism. But tonight, I would rest, secure in the knowledge that I'd done more than survive Derek's attempt to destroy my career. I'd transformed his betrayal into a movement, his corruption into a cautionary tale, and his attempt to silence me into a voice that now echoed through corporate policies across the country. As I walked through the office on my way out, I passed the conference room one last time. The security camera light blinked steadily, silently recording everything, just as it had 2 years ago. I smiled at it and whispered what had become my personal mantra, the words that had seen me through the darkest moments of this journey. The truth always matters. And justice, when done right, is worth the wait. Then I walked out into the evening, ready for whatever came next.